Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of Talking Pavements. My name's Trenton Clark, and I'm the president of the Virginia Asphalt Association. And with me, I have David Lee, who is our vice president. In this very first episode, we're going to address the number one question that comes into our office: what to do about my driveway or my residential street. So we hope you find this first webcast very informative. We're glad that you're joining us. So let's go ahead and get started. To help us through this, we prepared a presentation that we'll use to facilitate not only our conversations, but maybe your questions. So if you have questions as we go through this, using Zoom webinar, just use that question and answer box. And as you send them in, we'll be answering your questions. And don't fret if we don't get to all of them by the end of the webcast. We will still answer the questions and send them out to everybody who registered. So let's get going. So first, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And here we go. So first and foremost, who is the Virginia Asphalt Association? Well, we're a trade association that was formed nearly 70 years ago. Over the time, we've really faceted ourselves on being a training and education, a technical resource. So that's what we spend a lot of our time doing, is training individuals, not only members, but the public at large, on what pavements are and how asphalt works. We have a very large membership. We have about 125 members, not only companies that are located here in Virginia, but some of them are across the country. We have everything from the companies that produce asphalt to those that do different things like lay asphalt, mill the asphalt, do the pavement markings. And then we have a large number of members that are suppliers, whether they supply aggregates or they supply asphalt binder, maybe they provide insurance services, maybe they do some consulting. But we have a very large membership that's part of the VAA, so we're very diverse. Just a little bit of background on David and myself. We're both licensed engineers here in the state of Virginia. I've been in the industry for nearly 28 years. You would not know it looking at me. I know I'm much younger looking, but David has been in the industry a lot longer, as you can tell.
And I look it.
The gray mustache, that's what gives it away. And I think that turned gray when he started working for us a few years ago, working with me. But between the two of us and the whole staff here at the association, we have nearly 100 years of experience in a wide range of areas, from how asphalt is produced, how it's designed, how pavements are designed. So we have a good background. So when questions come in, we can help a lot of folks out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what are we going to talk about today? What are today's topics? Well, we're going to keep it pretty simple. What are we going to talk on, David?
We're going to talk about what's asphalt, just a real quick basic history, the components of the asphalt. Then we're going to get into some asphalt design, some basic design for streets and driveways. And then we're going to focus on what's the biggest thing on your minds, and that is the maintenance of those facilities, whether it be a driveway or a parking lot. And we're going to talk about sealing, patching, and things like that.
All the things that people constantly ask us questions about. Well, first and foremost, asphalt itself, can be a naturally occurring substance.
Absolutely.
But we also can refine petroleum products. It's adhesive and cohesive, so it's sticky, it's able to stretch, it's able to move, which makes it very durable. You know, some other things, it doesn't.
It's not soluble. It's something that obviously we don't want it to be able to be washed away when it rains and things like that. We also want it to be highly viscous, so that when you're placing the material, it can be placed very easily when it's hot, but then it solidifies and it creates a firm structure when it's complete.
David, you'd be surprised how many times we get asked, does it wash off?
Right.
Liquid asphalt does not wash off. So we want to make sure everyone's clear on that with the materials that we're using. Water won't wash away, so be very detrimental to our roads.
Exactly. Keep in mind, like Trenton just said a minute ago, asphalt comes from a number of sources. Many years ago, obviously, it was more of a naturally occurring product. There was the pitch lake from Trinidad. There's the La Brea tar pits in California. But today, most of the asphalts that you see are a refined product from petroleum production.
Right. So we've been refining it here in the U.S. and around the world for well over 100 years. A lot of the initial roads were coming from those naturally occurring tar pits from around the world. But today it's a very refined, a very controlled substance.
So let's talk about what the components of asphalt, today's asphalt mixes are. Basically, they're made out of the three things that's asphalt binder that we just talked about that comes from that refining process. Then there's going to be the aggregates. There's a real fine aggregate that's combined, and then there's a coarser aggregate, a larger particles that are all combined together to make the components of asphalt.
And when we talk about fine aggregate, for just a frame of reference, you're thinking of things about the size of sand.
Right.
So the sand at the beach, sand that you see along riverbanks, that's really what we call fine aggregate because of the size. And then when you look at the bigger materials, we call it coarse aggregate.
Right.
It's just nomenclature. So we may throw these out, but it's big rock, sand size rock, and liquid. That's mainly what's in asphalt, but we do have today so many other components that go into it. We have recycled asphalt. So the roads that are out there today probably have asphalt in them that were laid 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because we went through, we milled them, we processed them, and we blended them back in. That makes asphalt roads very sustainable, very resilient. We have tires. We've done ground tire rubber projects all around Virginia.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, one's the first ones to go back into the 90s.
Yes, in the early 90s, we did a number of test sections for rubber tire, both for crumb rubber, particles that are like the aggregates. And today we're also combining it into liquid asphalt itself.
Yeah, that ground tire rubber. We use shingles. So if you see shingles that are pulled off of a house, they're not necessarily going into a landfill. They can be taken to special facilities, ground down into, again, very fine particles and blended back into it because those shingles have a lot of asphalt in them. That's very stiff and we have to do certain things with them to utilize it. But again, asphalt in and of itself is a very recycled product, the most recycled product in the world. So what all is in there? It's mainly rock, mainly that fine aggregate and that coarse aggregate, but you need about 4 to 6%, depending on the material itself, of the asphalt binder, as David talked about, just to hold it together, to give it its strength. So we can protect against cracking, we can protect against rutting. All these things are going together in that mix design or that asphalt plant to make your driveway. So let's talk about the basic pavement structures.
Yeah, as we talked about a minute ago, we talk about pavement structures that are both the actual driveways, and then we talk about pavement structures that are out on our roadways and our parking lots. And each one of those has various different types of structures. Well, we have a section in our website that's available for your use and everybody's use that talks about pavement design. The summary is there for the mix design guidelines, so you can get in there and look and see what the mixes themselves look like. And then you can go on down into that and you'll see that there's stuff about street design, driveway design, parking lot design, and things like that. So for just a real quick reference, if you look at this slide, you'll see that there's standard designs for streets. This is on our website as well. So if you go out there and you look at this, you'll see that there's the basic design of your streets that everybody drives on every day. And you've got your pavement structure for the asphalt. You've got the aggregate. It's the same aggregate that's used in our asphalt mixes, but it's used in a different way for a sub-base aggregate below the asphalt pavement structure. And then you've got your subgrade. One of the most important aspects of your pavement is to ensure that your subgrade is strong.
When we look at the streets themselves, David showed you the typical section, but we use layers of asphalt and layers of stone to build these roads. So when we go through a design process, there's certain minimums that we want. So on our website as well, we have recommended minimums. Along with that, we also have recommendations as far as what material to use. Because the one thing we have in this industry is a lot of different options, but not all the options are really applicable to these instances. So you have to look at what's available. And, if you're having a home builder build your driveway, you need to be aware, typically they'll choose that material that will work best on your driveway. But if you as a homeowner want to make a change, again, be aware of what's out there. You may want to make sure it's one with smaller aggregate in it because it looks better.
Right. So a little smoother, your kids might be able to play on it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Absolutely, which are Very important. So again, you look at it, we have it if you're building straight on subgrade or basically straight on the dirt. If you're going to put an aggregate layer, what type of thicknesses, what type of materials, and we have it both for streets and driveways. We call full depth when it's built straight on the soil itself, on dirt. If we're putting a stone layer on it, then you'll notice you need a little bit less asphalt. The thing to keep in mind with driveways is if we can build them properly from the beginning and we can keep the water out of them, they should last almost indefinitely. They will crack, and we won't say that they won't, but from a structural standpoint, they'll be perfectly fine.
And that's a great point, Trenton. If you've got a driveway or you've got a roadway that's going into your subdivision, it's critical that you get the water off of that roadway. You don't want that water to pool on top of the roadway. You don't want that water to pool on the edges of your driveway. That water needs to be completely shed from the pavement itself. Otherwise, it'll get down to that subgrade I talked about earlier, and it'll saturate it and get it wet, and then you lose the strength of your pavement structure.
Right. I mean, cars themselves do very, very little damage because they're so light in terms of everything else. But you put a very saturated subgrade underneath of it, your soil is very, very wet, then it doesn't take much more than a car to cause it to fail. So that's why you'll see failures in driveways. It's usually because it's an area that's maybe the size of a kitchen table, but the subgrade got wet.
That's exactly right.
And the same with the road. So let's go ahead and assume we built it the right way. At times, it will need to be repaired. It will last a very long time, but you know, just like all of us, we need a little medicine. We need a little preventive maintenance. So there's different things that are available to you. We can do some patching, we can do some sealing and resurfacing, and we'll touch on each one of these. So the one question we get a lot, I need to do something to my driveway. Our initial question back is, can you send us a picture?
That's right.
Because while you may be able to describe it, we need to be able to see it because we can't go to every location. So send us a picture. So do you have a pothole? Well, if you have a pothole, you have an area that needs repair.
That's right.
The area that we're showing right here on this slide was caused by, and it was on a very low volume street, but the subgrade got wet. So just repeated loads on that wet subgrade led to it failing.
Exactly. I like to say a picture is worth 1,000 words in a case situation like this, because they're all different. Each pothole can be caused by different things.
Yeah.
So.
And we have to understand that to be able to provide you some guidance and direction.
Absolutely.
You may have a depression. Why? Well, sometimes that subgrade or even that aggregate layer doesn't get compacted, and over time, you'll see that that asphalt will just depress, and you may need to fix that just from a safety standpoint, a tripping hazard, cut it out and patch it back. And then, of course, the base failures. Typically, we'll see these more on residential streets where just the subgrade got wet, repeated loading, you have heavy trash trucks. Maybe you're in a subdivision where they're still building houses. Those ready-mix concrete trucks are extremely heavy. You've got loads coming in with drywall, lumber, all those things over time will cause that pavement to deteriorate.
And many times when they're building a subdivision, they'll actually keep that final surface off the roadway until they get all that construction complete. But when they do that, it's very critical that all the areas that have deteriorated, like Trent just described, get repaired before they put that final surface on it. If they don't, then some of what you see in these pictures can occur.
Absolutely. But David, talk about sealing, because that's a question we get a lot.
Sealing is one of those things that everybody likes to see a black surface. Obviously, asphalt's like any product like this, it's going to oxidize over time. It's going to tend to turn gray over time. But we like to think of that as a good thing, because as long as it's not cracked and it's not potholed, and you're not seeing any other deterioration, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. But we all recognize that sometimes on a driveway in particular, you know, you want it to look black. You want it to look that way. So sealing will provide that. It'll provide a nice uniform surface appearance. But at the end of the day, most of the time, sealing, particularly early on, is something that's there for aesthetics purposes.
Right. So often we get asked, well, we were told to seal 1 year after that we paved our driveway. And my question back to whoever asks that question is why. Why would you seal it? Again, if they've got it compacted well and keeping the water out, then there's really no need whatsoever. At that point, it really shouldn't have grayed out very much. But again, we'll see pictures that come in where we get segregation, as you see in that one photo. All that is a lot of big rock in an area. When you see a lot of it's a rough looking texture. When you see it like that, there's probably a couple things. One, compaction wasn't achieved while they were paving it. The material when they paved it could have been cold. And if those two things are going on, then most likely we didn't get density. And the question is, all right, after it rains, about a day later, do you see a wet spot there? And if the question or the response is yeah, then you're sealing with something that's got a lot of fine aggregate in it, like a sandy grit to fill in those voids. But that would be the only real reason early on from a structural standpoint that you would even look at it, because you're not going to fix the area. The area has already been built. It's already been constructed. You're just trying to limit a lot of that water that could be getting in, because once that subgrade gets wet.
Right. It goes back to what you just said. If you have segregation that's severe enough where the water is penetrating, and as it dries and you see those heavy wet spots, then that subgrade below it's likely going to get wet over time. So sealing those spots is something that's probably important.
Absolutely. Open cracks, it's good to seal the open cracks. Where we used to have an office, the parking lot was built in the mid-'80s. When we left that office last year, we had never paved that parking lot again. All we did was seal those cracks that formed to help keep the water out. And that's what sealing those open cracks do, is it keeps the water out of that subgrade so it doesn't deteriorate, because again, even cars driving over a very wet subgrade will cause a failure.
Exactly.
But David, there is times when you've got to resurface.
Absolutely.
And when you do it on a driveway and when you do it on a street, really two different areas. If you got extensive potholing in your street, probably time to resurface. You see lots of cracking. But on your driveway, you really have to make some assessments on, one, what are you willing to look at? If you don't want a patchwork of quilts.
Right. Yeah, for a driveway, sometimes if you look at it, it's as much an aesthetics issue as it is a surface structural issue. You might be able to patch it and it actually perform over time, but it's not going to give you the appearance you may want. So then sometimes you need to come in and just resurface the whole driveway. And if you see some of the cracking, if you see in the slide in front of you, you see there's some cracking there in the bottom corner. That's pretty severe cracking.
That is severe crack.
So you're probably going to look at needing to repair that and then overlay that pavement structure.
And keep in mind, if it's on your driveway, again, you can patch it, you can crack seal it, and you can seal over top everything. It won't hide it. So you will see the patches below it. You'll see the crack sealing below it. If you do choose to resurface, then you really have to make the determination, do I start over?
Right.
Do I take the old asphalt off? Do I repair that sub base, all that aggregate layer, or maybe the soil that I'm sitting on? If I decide to put a new surface on top, I've got drainage issues I got to consider. Last thing you want to do is flood your basement.
That's exactly right. So be sure that the grade's right. So if you're just going to overlay your driveway, it's obvious you don't want to tie into your garage to where now all of a sudden all the water that hits the driveway goes flooding into your garage.
Yeah, all big things to consider. Some closing thoughts as you go through this. If you're building or you're resurfacing, even if you're planning on having somebody seal it for you for aesthetic purposes, choose the right contractor. You can find stuff like through the Better Business Bureau, look for neighbors or others that have done it. A lot of our members work with the companies that do the driveways, that do the sealing.
Absolutely.
Call and ask them. They may not give you a name, but they'll give you a list of names.
That's right. That's right. And sometimes just be careful. Somebody might show up at your door and say, I've got some leftover mix and I'm ready to pave your driveway. Be extremely careful with that. You need to be sure the contractor's the right contractor to do the work.
And remember, if they're coming with you with leftover mix, what is it?
Yeah, It's cold.
It's cold. And remember, cold mix is one of the things that causes the most problems when you're building it. Make sure it's the right mix, because not all mixes work really well on driveways. Got to make sure that it can be compacted, that they have the right equipment. You see that upper left-hand corner, that little tamper. If that's how they plan on compacting your driveway, stop.
Stop them and send them home.
Yes, you cannot cover your driveway while it's still hot and get compaction. While you may not have a roller like we show, they do need to have a roller that can get on there and do the job properly. And do it while it's warm, because while the asphalt is the warmest is when we get the best compaction. And just remember, well-constructed pavements do not need sealing for structural purposes. Aesthetically, that's really up to you. But if they built it right from the beginning, you shouldn't need to seal it.
That's exactly right. So just keep that in mind.
So we hope you've enjoyed our first innovation, or our first Talking Pavements webcast. If you've got questions, again, make sure you've sent them in and we'll answer the questions live. And for those that we can't get to in the time slot, we will make sure to answer those questions and email them to you. So on behalf of the Virginia Asphalt Association, I'd like to thank David, and we'd like to thank you for joining us on this very first one. So thanks a lot, and we'll look forward to your questions.
Thanks again.